Well, it's great to hear Pat Belletta share this story of Elisha. Elisha is the successor of Elijah as a prophet. Elisha means "my God saves." And if you read about Elisha, you will see a lot of short stories about the miracles that he performs. And they look very similar to another one that we talk a lot about who performs miracles in the New Testament, Jesus. So you should look at 2 Kings around the section we are reading to read some of those other miracle stories. But the story that we are about to read in two parts is the longest and most detailed miracle story involving Elisha, and a little backstory to it. Elisha is passing through a mountain pass that's to the southwest of the Sea of Galilee, and a wealthy woman and her husband have a home there, and they begin to provide hospitality for Elisha in the form of meals. And they provide meal after meal as he comes to and fro in this mountain pass area. And finally, the wealthy woman says to her husband, "You know, he's coming and going a lot. Let's build a room for him." And the scriptures are really detailed with this. They say that the room not only has walls, it has a roof. They put in a table and a bed and a chair and a lamp for Elisha, and he begins to stay there. And the prophet thinks, well, they've done such wonderful hospitality for me. I wonder if they need anything. And so he asks them, and they really don't ask for anything. And then Elisha's servant says, you know, the husband is very old, and they have no children. And so then Elisha goes to the woman and says, in the near future, you will conceive a son. And she does. And our story continues from there. 2 Kings chapter 4, first verses 18 through 25. When the child was older, he went out one day to his father among the reapers. He complained to his father, "Oh, my head, my head." And the father said to his servant, "Carry him to his mother." He carried him and brought him to his mother, and the child sat on her lap until noon, and he died. She went up and laid him on the bed of the man of God, closed the door on him, and left. Then she called her husband and said, "Send me one of the servants and one of the donkeys so that I may quickly go to the man of God and come back again." He said, "Why go to him today? It is neither a new moon nor Sabbath." And she said, "It will be all right." Then she saddled the donkey and said to her servant, "Urge the animal on. Do not hold back for me unless I tell you." So she set out and came to the man of God at Mount Carmel. And the story continues. When the man of God saw her coming, he said to Gehazi, his servant, "Look, there is the Shunammite woman. Run at once to meet her and say to her, 'Are you all right? Is your husband all right? Is the child all right?' She answered, 'It is all right.' And when she came to the man of God at the mountain, she caught hold of his feet. His servant approached to push her away. But the man of God said, 'Let her alone, for she is in bitter distress. The Lord has hidden it from me and has not told me.' Then she said, "Did I ask my Lord for a son? Did I not say, 'Do not mislead me'?" And then he said to Gehazi, "Gird up your loins and take my staff in your hand and go. If you meet anyone, give no greeting. And if anyone greets you, do not answer. And lay my staff on the face of the child." Then the mother of the child says, "As the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave without you." So he rose up and followed her. The servant went on ahead and laid the staff on the face of the child, but there was no sound or sign of life. He came back to meet him and told him, "The child has not awakened." When Elisha came into the house, he saw the child lying dead on the bed. So he went in and closed the door on the two of them and prayed to the Lord. Then he got up on the bed and laid upon the child, putting his mouth upon his mouth, his eyes upon his eyes, his hands upon his hands. And while he lay bent over him, the flesh of the child became warm. He got down, walked once to and fro in the room, then got up again and bent over him. The child sneezed 7 times, and the child opened his eyes. Elijah summoned the servant and said, "Call the Shulamite woman." He said to her, when she came to him, he said, "Take your son." And she came and fell at his feet, bowing on the ground, and she took her son and left. The word of the Lord. Let us pray. Oh God, we live in a world where there is often deep darkness, where there are dead ends of death, and we are in despair. But you are the God of life, and even during Lent, even on these times where we reflect, where we need to go, where we haven't gone yet towards you, you are the one who brings in life and abundance and light. May we never stop pursuing that hope. May we move into places where we participate in the giving of life. And all God's people shall say. Now, here's a deep theological statement. There are few things as satisfying as a great sneeze. I'm not kidding. I love a good sneeze. And I'm sure this is not a surprise to any of you. When I sneeze, it is an event. It is loud and thorough. I always am somewhat mystified by those of you who have the gift of a contained sneeze or a small sneeze. Do you know people who have small sneezes, Like, how do they do that? How are they so restrained? Yeah, there is nothing like a big sneeze. And to be honest with you, even better than one good sneeze is when they come in like 3s or 4s. I'm not talking about a sneezing fit where you can't stop. It's just a good 3 or 4 sneezes, and afterwards you go, "Oh, that just felt great." And the worst is when you feel a sneeze coming on, and then you can't finish the job. You can't finish the sneeze. I just feel robbed when that happens. So this is fascinating in our story. I'll tell you, my favorite bit of this story is all these things happen to bring this child back to life, and the last bit before he opens his eyes is 7 sneezes. What in the world is that all about? Well, I think the key there isn't so much the sneezes, but it's the number 7. And for those of you who were here last week, I talked about the number 3 being a symbol or a number that signified completeness. And I said that number 3 is a lot like the number 7 in the Bible, which also is a symbol of completeness. 7 days a week, a complete week. So ancient readers would have seen 7 sneezes and said, okay, this is a complete act of God. This is the final piece in the power of God reviving this child and bringing this child completely back to life. We don't have a Hebrew word in the Old Testament for the concept of resurrection. Even though we've got stories of resurrection in the Old Testament, of death to life movement, we don't have a particular word for it. And we don't have a strong sense in the Old Testament either of heaven or hell, like a lot of us think about heaven or hell. We have the concept of Sheol, of death. It is a place of darkness. It is a place of gloom. It is a place where nothing is living. But here's what we do have an indication of in the Old Testament: that God has power over this death and over this place that is referred to as Sheol. Listen to some examples. Job, which is a tough book, chapter 12, verse 22. God uncovers the deeps out of darkness and brings deep darkness to light. Job 26, verse 6. Sheol is naked before God. Here's one that many of you have taken comfort in through the years. Psalm 139, verse 8. If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. God has the capacity even to go to the places of death and bring life. Amos chapter 9, though they dig into Sheol, from there shall my hand take them. Isaiah 25, 8, he will swallow up death forever. There is one explicit mentioning of resurrection in the Old Testament. It comes from the book of Daniel. I used to have to explain the word apocalyptic or apocalyptic literature, but now we have so many zombie movies where we use the word apocalypse that y'all have some sense of it. But it's talking about end times or times to come. And Daniel chapter 12 says this: many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. So they think that as time went on, as the Israelite community developed and little religious sects within it, that the idea of resurrection, of something after this life, began to emerge. And that verse is one glimmer of the idea of resurrection. But what goes through all of it is that God has power over death. The wealthy woman has a sense that this man of God that she calls Elisha has connection to the power of God, understands the power of God more than anybody she has come in contact with. And there's a part of this story that is so important for us to latch on to. She takes the child who has died on her lap, and the first thing she does is she puts the son up in the bed of the holy man. And we saw this with Elijah too at the last resurrection story we talked about. That's where the child who died first went. And the thought was, maybe if I connect this child with the Holy One of God, the place where the Holy One of God sleeps, maybe that will bring this child back to life. She lays the child there and she sees that it doesn't have an effect. So she knows what she needs to do. She knows she needs to go to Mount Carmel to find Elisha to help her son. She's got to travel 30 miles from her home to find this prophet. And she goes to her husband and says, hey, can you get me a servant and a donkey so that I can travel? And she doesn't tell the husband why. That's not a part of the story. She just says, I need to go find him. And he kind of makes a roadblock. Says, why do you need to do this? And she says something very interesting. It's 5 words for us. She says, it will be all right. But it's Shalom, she says to him. 1 word, which means it'll be all right, it'll be all right. And she moves on, and she travels as quickly as she can. And Elisha sees her coming and sends a servant down to her, and the servant says, is your husband all right? Is your child all right? And she says the same 1-word answer, it will be all right. And she gets around the servant, and she gets right up to the foot of Elisha. And I have this image of another New Testament story that we have of a hemorrhaging woman in a crowd who knows that Jesus has the power to heal her. And she makes her way through that crowd and just grabs Jesus' cloak. And the power goes into her to heal her. And Jesus knows the power has come out of him. And this woman, it says, caught hold of Elisha's feet. It's like she knows just touching this man will bring about the life of God. And very soon Elisha knows that this is a situation of life and death. The servant tries to stop this woman from touching him. He says, don't do it. She is in deep distress. And they quickly travel back those 30 miles. And we know the story. We've heard it a few times now. He goes up into the room. And he prays to God. He doesn't have the power. He knows the one who does have the power. And life returns to the child. And I think the most important thing to latch onto here is the number of times people got in the way of what her ultimate goal was. She knew where abundant life resided. It resided with the prophet. And her husband said, well, what are you doing? It's not the Sabbath. Why are you bothering him? And she said, it'll be all right. And she maneuvered around. And then she went to the mountain. And the servant got in the way again. It will be all right. And she got to where she needed to be to engage the power of God. And the question for all of us this Lent are, what are those things that jump in front of you, that draw you away, that distract you from where you sense you know the power of God is? And what are you doing like this wealthy woman to say, this is a roadblock, and I need to get around this to get to where I need to be with God? What is that in your life? What is that thing? What are those things? Who is that person that is preventing you from making your way to where the source of life, the one who will help you move from those places of death to life? Last week we talked about Elijah and his bringing a child back to life. A lot of similarities to this story. But I asked you to remember 3 things. The first thing is your breath. That this Lent you ought to be attentive to your breath and make it Hebrew broad. And what I mean by that, it's 1 word, but it has multiple meanings. That your breath is not just a breath that animates you, but it is the Spirit of God, and it is connected to the wind of creation. And that should make you utterly thankful for every breath you take in and exhale. The second thing that Elijah and Elisha show us, they are praying to God. God, this life shouldn't end right now. Bring life. I know you can do it. And they are utterly honest in their prayers. And this Lent, you are called to that honesty. And we go to the one who has completeness. That 7, that 3, the one who has the completeness of life, the only one. We run to that because nothing else has completeness like the God who provides life and breath. And today's story reminds us that there are things that will jump in front of us, that will try to prevent us from getting to that place of life or providing that place of life. And this wealthy woman sees that, and she says, nothing will stop me from getting to the foot of the prophet who will bring about life from death. May we identify what it is in our lives that gets in the way of us getting to the foot of the one who has life and power and abundance. Amen.